All right, guys, thank you. Welcome along to the Happy Cow webinar, which I think we've officially started calling now the Unreasonable Farmer podcast. A few people were asking for the audio file of these webinars, and I set them up on a podcast stream, and they needed a name, and I thought we need to do something better than the Happy Cow webinar. So we've called it the Unreasonable Farmer, basically based on the saying from George Bernard Shaw, which is all progress is made by the unreasonable person. So the world probably doesn't need another podcast, but it may need a podcast on unreasonable agriculture and the way forward. And that's what we want to do when we on these webinars and these podcasts, is just investigate all aspects of agriculture and food production. And what's funny is what is unreasonable to some is reasonable to others. And today's topic, we're talking about cow and calf separation, cow and calf bonding, bobby calves, everything to do with calves. And while you could be an urban person, you'd feel it's unreasonable for people to remove calves from their mothers on day one. You can also be a farmer and you may think it's actually unreasonable to leave them on. So I think this is what we'd like to do, is discuss all these issues, and we may not agree, but at least we can understand each other. So today we've got Sarah Bolton. Sarah is a vet in Australia, and she has done a Nuffield Scholarship on, well, basically what to do with the management of bobby calves and what to do with calves, and that's the work she does with Dairy Australia. So thanks, Sarah, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great. Well, we've been in touch for a couple of years. It's great to, I suppose, digitally meet you today. And you have, well, just so everyone understands, a Nuffield Scholarship is, well, why don't you explain it to us, please?
Yeah, so I summarised the Nuffield Scholarship into a bit of, well, I think an apt description is sort of like the Amazing Race agricultural version. So essentially what it is, it's an international scholarship that's offered in many different countries around the world, including Australia and New Zealand, but a lot of European countries, North America, many places. And essentially you, if you're successful in the scholarship, you're given the opportunity to travel the world investigating a particular topic of your choice. And the idea is that you bring that information back, but along the way you also acquire a global perspective on production, both now and into the future as well. So when I was successful in my scholarship in 2018, I got to visit 11 different countries, spent 4 months overseas, and yeah, had an incredible time, and it definitely changed my life. It was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, well, I think, well, you have to tell us about it, because I'm sure as we go on in the discussion, you'll some of the farms you visited overseas, some of the practices overseas will become relevant. So let's just talk about, well, we've got there's a couple of different issues here. We can talk about, let's talk about bobby calves, unwanted calves, and how they come about, and then later on we'll talk about maybe the cow and calf separation, bonding, that sort of thing. So what is a bobby calf, first of all?
Yeah, I guess this sort of approach makes sense because that's essentially how I first approached my Nuffield Scholarship. So when I applied for the Nuffield, I wanted to look at ways that we could improve the management of them. And for those that aren't familiar, essentially for a cow to produce milk, she has to give birth to a calf. That's just the way it works. The dairy breeds have been bred over many decades, specifically for their milk producing abilities. So we have genetics within the animal that makes her really good for producing milk, but she's a very different animal to the cows that produce beef animals. And so when that cow has a calf every year, if it's just a normal pregnancy, she's got half the chance of that calf being a female calf and half the chance of that calf being a male calf. And for the female calves that are born, the obvious place for them is to go on to become future milking cows. But for the male calves that are of pure dairy breed genetics, they don't make great beef producing animals because they haven't been bred for that and selected for that. So in, I guess, recent decades, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, one of the most economically viable ways of managing those male calves is, unfortunately, to send them to the abattoir when they're really young, because rearing them through to beef animals is a costly exercise and often doesn't provide the returns for the business to remain viable. So in both Australia and New Zealand, a lot of calves that are male calves, or even some extra female calves, go to the abattoir at 5 days of age or a bit older, and we refer to them as bobby calves.
Mm. So what you're saying is, I suppose farmers will milk a Friesian cow or a Jersey cow or some sort of cross, or maybe an Ayrshire, or a cow that's been bred to produce milk, and then that calf, if we have a male calf that is a Jersey, for instance, which is a smaller breed, it won't make a very good beef animal, because a successful beef animal is one that can grow a lot of muscle and a lot of weight, like I suppose an Angus or a Hereford. So I think the point is, no one really wants that Jersey bull calf. The dairy farmer doesn't want it because it's not going to produce milk, and the beef farmer doesn't want it because a Jersey bull calf is a small animal that's not going to be very profitable for them to grow up to 2 years of age and then go off to the works. So it's better off in their eyes to send it to the works at age 5 or whatever, like you said, 5 days. That's a good summary. So what what did you find? What was the methodology around your Nuffield, and what did you I suppose discover?
Yeah, so for me, this was a system that, or this was I guess, a status quo within the industry that I really wanted to see if we could actually shift and move towards some better practices, essentially. And within the Australian industry and within the New Zealand industry as well, we've always been, there's always been a lot of conversations around how other countries do this differently. And we know that, for example, in North America, there are a lot of Holstein calves that are reared through for beef production, for example. And, things are done here, there, and everywhere. So I reflect on my initial approach to my Nuffield Scholarship as probably starting out with what I think of now as a very veterinary approach, in that I wanted to go off overseas and find out the magic ways that people had fixed this with things like nutrition and husbandry and biosecurity and, production systems. And I guess, people who do Nuffield scholarships often refer to a lot of different light bulb moments that they have along the way. And I think one of my first light bulb moments was realizing that I certainly wasn't the first Australian or Kiwi or, someone from elsewhere in the world to head off overseas thinking, oh, how do we fix this problem? We'll just go next door and find out how they fixed it, bring it back here, and that'll sort everything for us. And that's not to discount the work that other people had done on the topic, but I really forced myself to question the way that I was approaching the topic from the beginning. And for me, one of the first questions that I made myself answer was around whether or not we were really motivated to change in this space. And if the motivation is purely coming from an economic side of things, then the reality is that consistent motivation year on year is just not there for us, because there's not the dollars and cents draw card to change the way that we're managing these calves. And that's essentially why we manage them the way that we do, because it's the path of least economic resistance. But then if the economic argument is not there, well, then do we just step away and not change the way we manage these animals? And of course, we know that in today's society, there is a rising interest from within the public in terms of how animals are managed within the systems that produce their food. And next to that, we also have a general public that is becoming more disconnected from agriculture. So they're more concerned with what we do within the industry, but they're also more disconnected. And for me, one of the big realizations was, very simple, there is a very real monetary value for the agricultural industry that is attached to this idea of public trust or social license preservation. And we need only look at an Australian example in 2012, where our livestock industry was shut down overnight, where that loss of public trust results in a huge financial loss for the industry. So for me, I suddenly became really drawn towards, away from the veterinary and the natural science side of things with this topic, and more that public perception, social license preservation things, and chose to approach the issue from that lens first, which made it really interesting.
Yeah, well, I think that's that's actually a good point, because I suppose when at Happy Cow Milk, when we talk about cows and calves and things like that, it's really a well, it's in conjunction with our customers, and I suppose well, it's in conjunction with our customers, but also trying to be animal led. So I suppose when I started Happy Cow, I had a blank sheet of paper. I didn't have a cow shed. I didn't have any land. We could design it however we wanted to. And actually, when you start like that, you start asking different questions. And I suppose for most dairy farmers, they have an existing infrastructure in place. They have big cow sheds or expensive cow sheds or barns or whatever you want to call it. And trying to, I suppose, change how you handle a bobby calf or any other sort of on-farm management has to fit within what they already have. And if you've got a $2 million cow shed, you know, any system has to work with that cow shed. Yeah, so you explain what you mean by, you know, not thinking of it from a veterinary perspective. What do you actually mean?
Yeah, so I guess in sort of stepping back from, well, I think within the industry we tend to, and within any particular sector, I think if you're ingrained into a certain way of thinking about something, it can be really difficult to sort of step outside of that and think about it with different. So I guess I was in the really fortunate position of, undertaking the Nuffield Scholarship at the time, and the whole idea is to remove yourself from your normal life and give yourself that freedom and that space in your mind to really actually start thinking about things from a really different perspective. Mm-hmm. So for me, when I made that shift away from, the technical aspects of how we manage dairy calves and started thinking more about it in the social context as well, it started to really open up. So when I had initially approached the topic, I was entirely focused on the male calf or the bobby calf issue. But then I started to do things like look more at animal activist campaigns against the way the dairy industry manages calves and try to understand from the average person on the street's perspective. And it became really clear to me at that point that from the eyes of the average person on the street, when they learn about issues within the dairy industry, it's as much of an issue of how we manage the male calves as it is about actually separating the cows from the calves in the first place. And that's just how the practices that we normally undertake either do or don't align with a person's core values. So very interesting.
Yeah, well, it just doesn't seem right. I think if you don't remove puppies or kittens from the mother. You don't, what else is there? I suppose if you just talk to a person on the street, it just doesn't feel right to do that. And I think it's, why do farmers do it? How has it got to this point?
Yes, well, I guess across the global dairy industry, we have had decades of really quite robust science that has presented very, very clear arguments for removing the dairy calf from the cow. And some of the really key reasons behind that are that we know that if dairy calves are left with the cow, that they will often fail to ingest enough of the cow's first milk. So the first milk that she produces is called colostrum. And that's really, really important in that when the calf drinks it, it gives the calves essentially a functioning immune system when they're first born. And so one of the big things that the dairy industry started pushing to farmers many decades ago is that, removing the calf from the cow in order to feed them a known amount of colostrum is really important.
So sorry to interrupt. So that's research to say that a calf doesn't drink enough milk from its mother, basically.
Yeah, so we know that actually about 40% of dairy calves, if they're left with the cow, won't voluntarily drink enough colostrum. And we think that's probably a factor of, the fact that dairy cows have much bigger udders than what beef cows do. And, there are a lot of differences between dairy cow unit compared to a beef cow and calf unit, but it's also not that clear cut. So I guess, throughout this conversation, my take home message when it comes to cow calf contact or cow calf separation is that it's complex, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of science around why one thing is good and why one thing is bad. but it doesn't mean that you can't run a good system in either way, if that makes sense. So, for example, we know that a lot of dairy calves won't get enough colostrum if they're with their mum, but we know that dairy farms that do suckle calves, that actively manage those calves' colostrum intake, can actually have comparable levels of intake of that colostrum to what conventional farms do, for example.
Right. So we're not actually talking they don't drink enough milk, like they don't nurse. We're talking they don't have enough colostrum in the first couple of days or the first day. Yeah. So they may not drink that much in the first day, but then they, day 2, day 3, they take off and then carry on feeding as normal. So is that right?
Yeah. So
okay.
the key with the colostrum is that first 24 hours in the life of the calf, and it doesn't matter whether it's a dairy calf or a beef calf, that intake of that first milk from mum that has that special ingredient, that colostrum, is really vital, because they can only absorb it in that first 24 hours. So whether or not we're leaving calves on cows or whether or not we're separating them, it's really vital that we manage that part really well, and it can be tricky, in one system or another.
Okay, so that's, I mean, I was born in the 70s and the 80s, and it was always the done thing that we would go and remove the calves from their mothers, and I didn't think about it. It was just the way it was done. So has this always been done, like for the last 80, 100 years, or not?
Oh, my knowledge of dairy history stretching back that far is I haven't sort of explored things down into that. But yeah, I think we'd be going back to sort of the Industrial Revolution almost, in terms of, or the Green Revolution rather, within agriculture, came to going, okay, well, we need to produce more food, and how can we do that, and how can we set food production systems that are more efficient? I mean, if you look at the traditional homesteading model, it was very common for a house cow to raise her calf as well, and there are a lot of people around the world that still use house cows and have that nice little homesteading setup where they really effectively manage one cow or a few cows, also milk the cow. But when we come into a food production system where we see several billion people, and we have larger dairy farms, sometimes with hundreds and in some cases thousands of cows, that in pastured systems are walking really long distances, all of a sudden just the practicality of rearing calves on cows can become really difficult, although not impossible. And yeah, factors like colostrum will come into it. There are disease transmission issues, in one way or another as well. The level of stress that the animals experience when we separate them, if we separate them early or if we separate them late, there's things that need to be integrated there as well. So it's a really complex space.
Yeah, well, here's a question from Matt, and we'll get to you soon, Bruce. Do you mean they get enough? They get enough for them, but they don't take enough off their mum. So that's, clarify. So that's saying they're getting enough milk. Oh, they're not getting enough milk from their mum. That's what the research is saying. Is that correct?
Well, if we're just talking about colostrum in that first 24 hours of life, the research shows that if we leave the calf with the cow and we don't do anything to help that dairy calf, get that first colostrum intake, we know that about 40% of them won't get enough of that colostrum. So forgetting about what we're taking away from mum, just focusing on what the calf is voluntarily drinking. So, and that's where because it means that we've got a high percentage of calves that could be more susceptible to disease.
Yeah, so they're not getting the antibodies from their mother via the colostrum. So yeah, I get that. Bruce has got a question here. What's the difference between a 6-hour bond between mother and calf and a 6-month bond? So that's a good question.
Very good.
Okay, sure. Let's get into cow and calf bonding.
Definitely start calves early, but so I guess this difference between the level of stress that both the cow and the calf experience and the timing that they're separated is again a complex thing. So one of the many reasons why the dairy industry has moved to a separation system on most farms is that because we know it is more stressful for the animal to be separated later in life than what it is in the first 24 hours. So to answer that question specifically, the cow and calf will be less stressed if you separate them when the calf has only been born 6 hours ago compared to 6 months ago. However, there was some research in the 70s that showed it can only take 5 minutes for a bond to form between the cow and calf. But if we separate them at 6 months of age and we just outright separate them and we don't do anything to, make that a better process, that can be really, really stressful on the animals. And that can, in some cases, be what happens in the beef industry as well when those calves are weaned. But fortunately, there's some really nice research that shows that if we do a gradual separation and ideally separate out the calf being reliant on mum for its food and for its milk, and their actual physical separation into two separate events, that it can be less stressful. So
okay, so yeah, well, I think we'll bring thanks, Bruce. I think we'll bring Chris. We've got our farmer Chris. I'm not sure if his stream is working. Can you hear us, Chris?
I can.
Oh no, you're good. Good day. So Chris, we were talking about this the other day. The question is, that cow and calf bond, and I suppose the argument we would get from the dairy industry, well, I get, is that it's better to remove the calf at, on the first day rather than let them get to know each other over, an 8-week period or something like that. What's your experience?
I think we don't know, because we've not been through a process of allowing them to choose.
Okay, they tick a box, what they want to do. So you're saying, well, what do you mean? I mean, you're saying on your farm you haven't given them the opportunity yet. Is that what you mean?
Well, I have, and they've been quite relaxed about it. So what I did was I allowed 3 or 4 calves. Technical issues.
No, you're good at this side. I've just kicked you off because you had 2 devices on the stream, and then we'll get echo.
Hello.
Oh, no. Chris is gone. So carry on, Sarah. There is research. We'll come back to you, Chris. There's research about.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Should I?
Shit.
He's still there. We'll just blink him out. I suppose from our perspective, we started leaving all our calves with their mothers straight from the start. And then all of a sudden, I was so busy. It was like, oh, it's time for these calves to be weaned. And the first 8 calves I weaned, I just separated them, and there was a heck of a lot of bellowing going on. And I observed it was a lot more than if you had removed them at day 1. So explain to us, what are some of the methods of I suppose of weaning an older calf from its mother?
Yeah, so when a calf has been drinking from its mum and has been reared by its mum is weaned, there are 2 major sources of stress in that situation. And the first is that it's no longer getting any milk when it is able to have, in some cases, free access to a milk bar whenever it wants. And that situation is that it no longer has its mum, and it's an animal that it's bonded to. And, we know that that's a source of stress in itself, just being physically separated and no longer able to be physically with its mother. And so when it comes to reducing the stress around weaning, and this is in beef systems as well as in dairy cow-calf systems, the idea is that we want to reduce the total amount of stress that animal experiences at a particular time. And a key way of doing that is to separate out those 2 sources of stress so that it only experiences one at a time. And
so lack of food, or lack of milk, and separation from mum. So even though it doesn't, at this age, I think we should clarify, even though it doesn't actually need the milk to sustain itself, it's just used to having lots of milk. It likes it. Yeah,
definitely. So a little kid that's, just getting that bottle before bedtime is a bit of a comfort thing, kind of. But it's not on it anymore. It's it's gotten to the point where it's old enough and it's physically functioning well enough in order to get all the nutrition that it needs from grass or solid feed, but it's still enjoying that milk. And so a couple of practical ways that various cow-calf systems have achieved that, and you would probably have your own experiences. But essentially, the easiest way to do it is to make it so the calf is no longer getting that milk feed first. So it's still with its mum, but it just has to experience that. Guess what, buddy? You don't get milk anymore, and that's that's really hard to deal with. But you're only dealing with that at the moment.
How do you do that?
That's the next question. So a couple of practical ways.
Sorry.
A couple of practical methods that people have used are what's called fence line contact. So it's got an open fence where the cow and the calf can still touch each other, can nose each other, can lick each other, but it's enough of a fence that the calf can't actually get through and suckle from mum's udder. So that's called
I think I have a picture.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so mum and calf, they separated through a fence, so they can't really suckle, but they can still touch each other, and they still, I suppose, feel bonded.
Yeah, so the calf's not experiencing so much stress in terms of, oh my gosh, where's mum? But they are sort of dealing with that isolated stress of going, oh, I can't have that milk feed anymore. And so what the next step would be then to between them. Another practical method of achieving the same thing is using a nose flap, and there's a nice one. I don't know whether you could bring up an image of the quiet wean nose flaps, Glenn. Yeah, those nice yellow
I
ones.
have an image prepared.
There you go. So that there is almost like, think of it like a little duckbill, and it's essentially a piece of plastic that's curved with a little gap in the middle. And it's almost like putting in a fake nose ring. If you imagine you bought yourself a fake nose ring to go in your septum, there's like a little gap there, and so it sits in there, and the flap comes down whenever the calf wants to put its head up to suckle like that. So that calf can't actually get that cow's teat in its mouth. But if you put it down, he can eat grass, he can eat grain, and he can drink water without a problem. So this little guy out with his mum, do everything else in the world that he would normally do. He just can't get that teat in his mouth, and so he can't have the milk feed anymore.
So I've shown this to a few of our customers who have asked me this. They do not like this system. They do not like the I suppose the image of the nose ring, I suppose. Even so, it's not. It's not hurting the calf. It's not piercing the calf or anything like that.
No, so the flap is just sitting there. You do have to manage it well, because if they're left in too long, they can start to rub the calf's nose, but usually they leave them there longer than they need to be. So we usually leave them there for a few days so that the calf is getting used to this idea of not having milk anymore. And at the point the calf then we move into okay, now we're going to actually be separated from mum. We take the nose flap out at that point. So it's not actually whole. There's just a little gap there that sits almost like a fake earring that we would use like a cuff or something.
So, and the idea is that the cow and the calf basically stay together, but you're not like a calf that age would drink half your milk if you left it drinking. So that's the argument against just letting it suckle for as long as it likes.
Yeah, and it's also, at some point these guys are going to have to be separated, and so it's definitely having a positive effect in terms of reducing that stress on the calf too. I
mean, how old would a cow? We've lost Chris. I tried to add him. How long would here he's back? How long would a calf suckle for? If we just left it there.
This is testing my brain of the limited information we have of these animals in the wild, but for at least 6 months, a bit longer. So at about that sort of 6 to 10 month mark is when they start to sort of start reducing that cow calf bond in a wild or natural situation. Realistically, I've seen adult cows in the herd try and suckle from other cows, kind of thing. So there's going to be a lot of variability.
Chris, carry on.
Hi.
Oh, you're good. We can hear you loud and clear.
Oh, cool.
I suppose I think to clarify, just to sum up, we've seemed to go all over the place, but a lot of farmers I'll talk to, they'll say, "Oh, I'm Glenn from Happy Cow," and they go, "Oh, yeah, great, and we're getting rid of bobby calves. We don't have any bobby calves." And I say, yeah, well, that's fantastic, but they're still removing calves from their mothers at birth. It's just they're not sending them to the works at 5 days of age. And then when we discuss about the leaving calves with their mothers, we get into the debate about all the practicalities of actually doing that. So, Chris, you've got a conventional cow shed, and you've started experimenting with the cow and calf, leaving calves with mothers. So, can you enlighten us a little bit on your experiences?
Sure. So the first thing to say is that I'm not philosophically saying that calves should stay with their mothers, but what I am saying is that if people think that that's what we should be doing as farmers, then I'm willing to experiment and willing to go through a process of seeing how that can work for us. And in my limited experience is that basically what you need to do is offer the calf the choice. So if the calf wants to leave the mother at the back end of the cow shed, and that's where they feel most comfortable, then that's what we should let them do. If they want to stay with their mothers and walk up beside them through the bales of the cow shed, that's fine as well. We should let them do that. If they're at the point whereby they're happy to leave their mothers at the yard and walk through and meet them at the other end, we should also allow them to do that. So pretty much it's about just letting them have the choice to do what they want to do. So it's not a prescriptive thing. It's not about saying, this is how we will do it. This is how you as a calf will behave. It's about saying, pretty much, you do you, and we'll allow you to do that.
Okay. So do you have to make changes to your equipment? Or, I mean, calves, if they decide they want to go in with mum into the holding yard with 300 other cows, it might not know that it doesn't actually want to do that. Because it may get squashed by 300, 500 kg cows.
Yeah. Well, that comes down to how you treat the area that they collected. So we have 3 areas, so they can come into the actual round yard, or they can sit outside in the next layer, or there's another layer outside of that. So there's like a bunch of areas that they can choose to be in whilst their mothers are being milked. But most importantly is just sitting back and not pushing them to do it. So if you can think of it in terms of stages, so you set the outside gate where everybody gets every option, and then you go to the next one where everybody has 2 options, and then the next one is you've got 1 option. But they'll make their minds up, and they very quickly do. You'll be surprised how quickly they do, because calves have personalities and preferences that are not for us to decide. They'll decide that, and we'll just let them do it. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, we sort of found when I was milking with the mobile cow shed, I'll try and show a picture of it, that the calves would actually join together and they would take off during the day, because we only had 2 wire fences, so the calves could pretty much go wherever they wanted, and they would sort of return back around 3 o'clock and start suckling again. And basically I didn't really worry what the calves did. I would tag a calf, and then you'd just leave it, and it would, if it was hungry, it would always come back. And then when it was time to sort of wean them, that's when we would do something about it. But so you're I suppose what I'm hearing from you is that you are changing your infrastructure to try and make it work.
But it's not a big thing. It's about just adapting what we already have. So I saw a drafting gate in Argentina whereby they had a set of cattle yards with a low rail, and the calves went that way. The dams went the other way. And I just thought, well, we can do that in a cow shed. Like, so we've got gates with 4 bars. How about they have 4 bars, but there's 2 bars that I can open up that gives an option to calves.
Right.
So they get to choose where they go, and that's what I'm. So in terms of the 3-yard system, is that at any point they have the option. So there'll be a gate through which cows can't go because we've got to milk them, but the calves can go through at any point they choose, and it could be at the outset, it could be mid-milking, could be end-milking, but they'll get to choose.
Okay. Sarah, is there any research that removing a calf from its mother is, I suppose, stressful or detrimental to the calf? I mean,
yeah. So I guess in terms of whether or not it's stressful and whether or not it's detrimental is becoming a more and more complex field of science. So once upon a time, when we looked at whether a particular experience for an animal was stressful, particularly dairy cows, we would look at things like cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, or we might look at how many times the calf vocalized or made noise. But we're starting to see some really wonderful work happening, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, that's looking more and more at sort of complex effects of negative experiences on animals and how it might influence their ability to, for example, adapt to new environments, or whether or not they have a naturally pessimistic view of the world. And so we're starting to actually scratch the surface of some really interesting stuff. I guess that the top line answer at the moment is that, we know that earlier separation appears to be less stressful, but we can make it less later on if we manage that well. And I think that's the key take home when it comes to a particular dairy system that we're running, in that there's a big difference between a really well-run conventional dairy farm and a really poorly run cow-calf contact farm, and vice versa. There's really big, well cow-calf contact farm and a really poorly run conventional farm too. So, but at the same time, we're starting to learn more and more about how complex these animals are and how stress can sort of affect them at a much deeper level too. So it's a very interesting space.
Do you think that the cow and calf bond is the same as a human mother and baby bond?
Yeah, so the whole argument around anthropomorphization is very controversial, and I don't think scientifically we have enough evidence to say that it definitely is or it definitely is not. But as we start to learn more and more about animals and the way their minds work, we get closer to knowing more about them. So I don't think that question at the moment.
You're not going to. Well, we'll see if our listeners know. Come on, we just pop in the comments. What do you think? Yes or no? Because I think this question really is quite enlightening in how you look at the world. If you think it is similar, then you would have certain attitudes. If you think it's different, again, what makes sense to you and what's rational and reasonable is different again. What do you think, Chris?
Well, I think we have to accept, if we are to accept that there are other sentient beings, that they experience the same things that we do. I mean, it's pretty obvious to me that they do.
Yeah.
So it's a yes from me, Glenn.
Okay, it's a yes from you. So if does it apply to bulls and calves then?
Well, I don't differentiate between them. So in my world, they come onto the farm, they're born of a cow, they have a they're beings. We do what we want to do in terms of helping them to thrive, as every good farmer should, but also we look to make sure that they're not exploited outside of our own realm as well. So it's not good enough. It's not good enough to put a calf on a truck and say, I'm done. Not good enough.
Oh, and yeah, I mean, I'm going to challenge you though, because that's my job as the host. If you left a calf with its mum, let's say it's a bull calf, and it suckled from its mum for a year, at what stage would the calf start mating with its mum?
Well, I will defer to Sarah here because she's the vet. but my experience is it's not even a year old.
So that my argument to, I mean, I believe in the sentient beings as well, and I think we are very dedicated to building a system that treats them as such. But I think there is a differentiation because incest is obviously not acceptable in the human world, where animals probably don't think twice about it. Do you think that's fair, Sarah?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment.
Okay, Sarah's on the fence. She's not going to.
Well, I don't know how we got here, Glenn, but I'm just saying that
these are the questions you think of. People are thinking of it. I mean, I get asked this all the time.
Well, okay, well maybe they are, but the reality is, in a farming system, if you follow the process of an animal maturing and doing what it wants to do, then that's the logical outcome. I don't think we can hide from that. But what I can say is that we need to manage what we do to make sure that
I suppose
animals are valued but not exploited. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, no, I agree with. Well, it's probably the topic for next week, where we're talking to Professor Anne Galloway about basically what is it to be an animal and a human, and this calf-cow bond and the emotions and the sentience of cows it's all part of it. I mean, I've seen I was chatting to a young woman the other day who's a vegan, and she's basically sort of views an abattoir as if it's humans walking in there getting slaughtered, and you can understand how distressed you'd get if you feel like that, but I don't feel like that and other people don't. And I suppose it's well, I don't know, it's an interesting I find it interesting. Anyway, here's Katie saving me. I think there are two things here. I believe the bond is both will be strong, but humans can plan for the future, not sure cows do. And this adds an extra layer of complexity and emotion from a human perspective. Yes, that's a good point. Can you comment, Sarah? Are you prepared to comment?
Yeah, I mean, we know we isolate whether or not the strength of the bond is comparable. I think we definitely have enough to know about that. But, it's not my area of expertise by any means, but I think the average person on the street can recognize that as far as social interactions and behaviors and things go, humans are, undeniably a more complex animal from what we can tell as far as we know. But I think it's also important to recognize that we don't have enough of the systems in place to really be able to understand the world from another animal's perspective outside of our own. We're getting there and we're getting better at it all the time, but we certainly can't say that this is exactly how, another animal perceives the world, for example.
Okay. Sorry, you cut out a bit there, but okay. So what was the actual the conclusion of your Nuffield study? What did you come to at the end?
Yeah, so I guess the overall sort of take home message for me is always around this idea that, you know, within a particular food production system, we can say that we do things for certain reasons based on science, and that's great. But I think within the agricultural sector, we've sort of dealt with this kind of, as I mentioned earlier, this rising disconnect between the general public and the agricultural sector, and a rising level of concern around how we do what we do, particularly when it comes to animals. The agricultural sector has been pretty keen on addressing that with what I often refer to as the education approach, in that, you know, the general public doesn't approve of what we do, so we just need to educate them about why we do it. And really one of the take homes from my Nuffield was that actually that's never going to work for us. Education is really important. It's never going to be the fix all, and broader industry, we need to be working to, over the long term, make sure what we do actually aligns with public values, and recognizing that as a society and as humans, we're going to be evolving socially, hopefully continuously into the future. You know, it was only a few hundred years ago that we thought human slavery was fine, and, you know, that we could just stone people in the street and that's how we would dispense justice. So we've come a really long way in a short period of time as humans. And for me, the message is that as a food producing sector, we need to be making sure that over the long term, we're continually adjusting how we do what we do to make sure it stays in line with the general public approves of, and what is in line with their core values. So when it comes to bobby calves, that's about making sure that we're starting to change those practices much sooner rather than later. And that's really difficult to do, but we're actively addressing it, which is great. And then when it comes to cow-calf contact, it's more difficult for conventional farms to be addressing that side of things, but there are people that are out there, you know, changing up the system and making it work for them. And, you know, that's a really great example that we can all be looking at as well, going, well, what are our options here? But the take-home message in the cow-calf contact space for me has always been, if every dairy farm, you know, that's out there operating as it does, left calves in the paddocks with cows tomorrow, it could be a welfare disaster for those animals because of the way the system is run. But if we redesign systems and change them up a bit, as Chris was sort of speaking to, we can definitely make it work.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. Bruce makes a point here. How do you make 500 cows and calves in a cow shed work? And and this really comes down to the existing system. And the existing system is that 100% of your herd, for most New Zealand and for the rest of the world, farmers will calve within a 4 to 5 week period. So you have 400 and 500 cows calving at once. And I suppose, you know, for us, I think we try to calve all year round. So you have basically 1 or 2 calves a month. But there's a very logical reason why farmers calve in, you know, a short period. Well, why don't you explain that, Chris?
Well, firstly, we ride the wave of feed supply. So in the North Waikato, we have 2 waves. So in my example, we can do, so I split calve. So we calve in autumn and spring. So we're responding to that natural trigger by doing so.
So when the grass grows, that's when you want your cows to calve. That's what you're saying?
Well, exactly. Yeah. And we do that in October, and we do that in April. There are 2 like trigger points, as it were. So I'm not, what I don't want to do is say that how we do it is an exemplar. What I'm saying is that what we're doing is responding to the way our feed supply comes to us naturally. And and also it's actually quite nice to be able to push our calving dates into places that make sense for us as farmers as well. So so most people, spring calving people around us, will calve on July the 10th. That's not spring to my mind, but they'll do that so that they can have all of their cows in the flush when the grass comes in end of September, October.
So I suppose this is a good example. If we look here, milk production is the red line. Sorry, blue line. Pasture growth is the red line. So here we are. Everyone's calving in August, mostly. I say everyone, but you know, most of New Zealand calves in August because that's when the grass starts to take off and our milk curve follows.
But they don't. The average start of calving date is not in August.
When is it?
Well, up here it's 10th of July.
Oh, so, yeah. Well, you live in the tropics down here in the South Island,
yeah. Yeah. But
I don't know how we got talking about that.
Okay. But
oh, yes, Bruce's question about why we got 500 cows and calves all in one paddock and what a nightmare it is to deal with. And I suppose, yeah, what's your opinion?
Yeah, but that's not what happens.
It's not what happens.
If you're sensitive to your region, if you're sensitive to what your farming system will allow you to do, that won't happen. So the response is, I trust farmers to do the right thing. What I don't want to see is some arbitrary rules around what you should and shouldn't do. What I would like to see is sensitivity around supply and demand of feed and how we treat our cows as beings.
But I think I'm going to get controversial here. A lot of people would say that the farmers have been given 20, 30 years to do the right thing, and they're simply not doing the right thing. So many people would say that there's basically Glenn Herod and his happy cows and maybe Rowan Milk and a handful of others around New Zealand are the only ones that are really doing
it. Well, the answer is no. And so the reason I do what I do is because I want to center all of the beings in our world, and I want to center the soil, and I want to center the community, and I want to center what our farm needs to do for us as people. And if you don't, and if you can't tick those boxes, you'll be forever fighting with somebody. So what I don't want to be doing is putting ourselves in a situation where someone says, yeah, but what about this?
What do you think, Sarah? I mean, I can't see any government or any regulatory body actually forcing farmers to change their practices around cows and calves.
No, I think it's always going to be, or certainly in the short term, it's going to be market driven. There are organic standards in Scandinavia, I believe, that stipulate that calves are suckled for a certain period of time. But I guess going back to that sort of question around logistics, how do you see 500 cows and 500 calves, going in the cow shed together? And, to my earlier point that if, your average conventional dairy farm was to just leave calves in the paddock tomorrow without any management or system adjustments, it would be a health and welfare disaster. Whereas if we think about how we might run systems differently, for example, there's some fabulous researchers in Germany who have designed a particular type of barn system that are currently milking about 1,000 cows in a cow-calf system model that have special computerized selection boxes that the calf can go and see mum and mum can go and see the calf, and they're using technology and automatic recognition of individual animals' identity stuff. I guess it's around this idea not we're really motivated to change. I mean, we put a man on the moon in the 60s kind of thing. Like, if we really wanted to make these systems work, we could. But we also can't expect conventional systems to suddenly just adapt to this and there to not be any negative consequences, because there could be some severe if they're not, specially managed to actually accommodate this different way of running the animal.
Yeah, and I can see that. It's well, I'm talked to farmers almost every week about becoming happy cow farmers, and this is the question that trips them all up. I'd probably have 100 farmers supplying happy cow milk by now, but it's the cow and calf thing, and we're not going to back down on that, because that's where our supporters. That's why we have the supporters we have. But Chris is, what's an attitude? I think Chris is making it work. Well, you're trying it.
Well, I've tried it, and
yeah, you're trying it.
I think what people will argue is that how will that work at scale, and that's what Bruce is talking about. He's saying, so how do I have 500 cows and X number of calves, which will be more than 500, because we know that's what happens. And how do I deal with that? And how does that work for them? And to be honest, there's some genuine concerns that I don't think in the conventional mass calving, spring calving model can be overcome.
I agree.
And I just don't see it. So what I'm thinking. So so here's my
I'll get my
technical.
Out. Yep, carry on. I'm ready to hear this.
So here's my technical self thinking about how I'm going to supply an amount of milk over the course of the year, and we have to think about this. We can't ignore the fact that if we're going to supply milk and we're going to have customers, that they need to have the product day in, day out. So how am I going to achieve that? What I'm going to do, well, my response is maybe I calve 3 times a year.
Yeah.
And maybe I have to run cows through. But that's a thing for me to deal with as a farmer and as a proponent of taking care of livestock. So I got to deal with that. But do you know what? Yeah. If that's what people want, then that's what I have to respond to.
Well, that's cool. And my I sort of feel, and the reason I've been going on about with happy cows so long is I actually feel large scale is becoming a disadvantage to dairy, and currently scale is important because that's how you make money, economies of scale. But I think the scales are tipping a bit towards the animal welfare side of things is more important, or becoming more important than scale, and we have to make dairy work. And I don't believe larger scale farms is necessarily the answer.
So in response, what I want to do is integrate more beef into my system, so that I'm not. So the milk god has to be fed all the time, right? But if I have a situation where I can shift some of my supply into beef instead of milk, I can do that. But if rearing calves on cows helps to facilitate that, that's fine. I can deal with that.
You've done a bit of work on that, though, haven't you, Sarah?
In terms of
I was reading somewhere you had Jersey beef market, something that you were working with or investigating.
Yeah, so that was one of my favorite experiences on my field was. So I guess I was becoming. I don't like to be told something's impossible, and I was really frustrated with a reasonably prevalent attitude from within the beef and the dairy sectors that we and Holstein animals into dairy beef production make that profitable, but the Jersey animal, there's no hope because they're lower yielding and yellow fat, etc., etc. But there was also a lot of science out there that shows that the meat quality from Jersey animals is actually really high, and they rate really highly in terms of marbling, taste, tenderness. And so I became a bit frustrated around this idea that, okay, if the Jersey animals got meat of high quality but poor yielding, is this completely just unsolvable? And my favourite discovery during my Nuffield was an organic Jersey milk processor in Denmark that only picked up milk from farms that only had Jersey cows, and they move away from euthanizing the male calves on those farms. So the milk processor actually worked with the supermarkets that sells milk to create a grass-fed Jersey beef organic product that sold market shelf for a premium because it was really high eating quality. So they were almost marketing it like Wagyu. And that actually allowed it to be profitable to rear those pure Jersey animals through for beef production. And they actually integrated it with organic cropping farms as well. So it was a bit of a closed loop system, and it was really nice. I just loved that approach of, really stepping back and questioning what we've always said is doable and what's not doable, and challenging what we value and what we don't value as well. And we're seeing that now in some niche markets with, there's some fabulous producers here in Australia that are growing out retired dairy cows and marketing that meat as, basically gourmet and for a huge premium, and really just turning on that head what we've always considered to be a waste product. It's a bit like that idea of, lamb shanks and pork belly once upon a time used to be the sort of offcuts that no one wanted, and now they're worth a fortune because we've changed our perspective. And I think that's the really key thing is being prepared to change our perspective on things.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of trying to be open to changing your perspective on things. We've got one last comment, and I think we'll wrap it up. So, New Zealand's biggest downfall is their fascination with crossbred cows. Kiwi cross, keep them straight. Oh, well, that's, a purebred Ayrshire breeder would say that. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, anything you want to that I've missed out? Well, I could talk all night about this, but anything to wrap up with? No.
Well, from me, basically, I'm responsive to the market, and when the market or consumers ask something of me, I'll look at any way that I can make that happen. And what I'm not prepared to accept is that I'm going to be a price taker because of that. So what I see all the time is dairy farmers in New Zealand saying we're price takers and we do this thing, and you do this thing because you're not listening.
All right, Sarah, any last words?
Yeah, I just having me, Glenn, and also just emphasize that I think as an industry, this very platform that you've got here tonight, where we've got people from within the industry, more or less virtually sitting down with members of the general public as well, is a really important forum. And I think the more we can have these conversations, and as an agricultural sector, interact more with the general community as well as the people that are consuming our products, the more we can work towards this, ever distant horizon where we improve our practices and challenge ourselves to shift perspectives when we need to too. So it's been a fabulous opportunity, and look forward to watching next week's.
Oh, well, thank you, guys. I appreciate you taking your time. Thanks, Katie, Bruce, and Matt. We appreciate your comments every week. And next week, we're talking to Anne Galloway, all about cow emotion and sentience and all that sort of stuff, which is something I'm pretty excited about. But thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll bump into each other again. And most certainly we'll see you, Chris. So thanks, everyone. And thanks for joining us. Cheers.
Thanks so much.
Bye.